Before we get into it, I'd like to start by introducing our panelist. I am Sheila Guest. I'm a senior manager within EcoSure's content production team, supported by Greg de Villiers. He's our content strategy manager. Greg specializes in structured learning design and content strategy within our EcoSure Lobster Ink product. Greg's expertise support the development of scalable, industry-aligned micro-credentials with a focus on creating learning solutions that are practical, consistent, relevant to the hospitality workforce under the MCEU project. We've got Gerard Duplessis, Associate Vice President of Corporate Accounts at EcoSure. Gerard brings senior level hospitality and food safety domain expertise, along with a strong industry-facing perspective, particularly in validating the practical applicability and employer relevance of hospitality-focused micro-credentials. Helen Gray joins us from Iceland, leads international projects for trade and industry at Eden in Iceland, a national training center for continuous professional development across crafts and trade in Iceland. Eden supports lifelong learning through a wide range of high-quality courses and fully equipped teaching facilities, strengthening workforce capability and skills development across industries. And we have William O'Keefe, Policy Officer at the Directorate General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion of the European Commission. William is also involved in the Pact for Skills initiative, one of the flagship actions of the European Skills Agenda, which is aimed at supporting public and private organizations to thrive through the green and digital transitions through upskilling and reskilling. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us and being our panelists. We have Karina from EcoSure Marketing. She's going to keep an eye on the chat for us and support with questions. So rather than treating these as assessments, recognitions, stackability, scale as separate topics, we're all going to just handle this as a conversational flow, because in practice, these only really work when they're designed together. So let's start at the foundation, shall we? If we're looking at micro-credentials for hospitality, what we're really talking about is recognizing the skills that people need to use every day in their everyday work. So Helen, I'd like to direct the first questions towards you. How would you be proving skills in a way that is credible without sort of creating these traditional exams that don't really fit the front line's reality?
Well, thank you, and hello to everyone. Good morning, greetings from Iceland. Well, assessment has to be a part of the picture. If learning outcomes are defined, then there must be a credible way of confirming them, whether those outcomes are actually being, so that we can kind of recognize that these outcomes are being achieved. Otherwise, we risk undermining the value of learning itself. For me, the issue is not whether assessment is needed, it absolutely is. The issue is for us how to assess in a way that is valid, fair, and practical for people working in the front line in hospitality in this context. It should confirm competences against clear learning outcomes in a way that it is accessible and inviting to learners from all walks of life. That's my true belief. That does not mean that there's only one way to assess. Traditional testing still has its place in some context, but it should be, it should not be the default in every learner for every skill. Continuous assessment can often provide a fuller, more realistic picture of progress and competence over time. Especially when you are working and alongside work, this is very important. And of course, validation of prior learning, that kind of came into my mind when I started preparing for this panel. And I think it's validation of prior learning is relatively a mature framework in Europe, and rightly so, because people do not only learn through formal education. They also build skills through experience, through work, and through life, and assessment frameworks should be able to recognize that. In the MCU project, this is really why we're here. This is part of the MCU project, Micro-Credentials in the European Union. We developed a learning pathway made up of several short online courses created by Lobstering. And these learning pathways were measured against ESCO skills, the European Classification of Skills, Competences, and Occupations, with the learning outcomes clearly defined. We also aligned these learning pathways with the EU recommendation for micro-credentials, with trying not to over-engineering the process. So to round this up is that the MCU project, there are course assessments. They are designed to be accessible, context-bound, and relevant. The intention is not to create unnecessary barriers, but to confirm achievement in a way that is both meaningful, both for the learner and for the labor market. And what we're trying to show is when learning is organized in a more structured way with clear outcomes, appropriate assessment, recognizable credentials, it creates value. It gives the learners something meaningful and can be shared and understood, and gives employers a clear signal of what a person knows and can do. And I think one of the biggest challenges is, of course, is encouraging the labor market to recognize and embrace the way of building and valuing learning. But our firm belief is, or my belief is, that we organize and issue credentials as recognizable micro-credentials in a way that are credible and meaningful, and we can bring more professionalism, support professionalism in the hospitality sector, and create a stronger value both for the holder and employee. So that was my take on assessment. So
yes, and it meets the learner in their environment, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
In a professional, in their professional setting, in their reality. So, Greg, this brings me to thinking, when we're talking about assessments and the real work and the real evidence behind that, what does that mean for how we actually design these assessments?
Yeah. And I think there's something, Helen, that you said there, which is, and Sheila, you echoed it, right? It's this respect for them, their reality, their goals, and all of that. And I think that respect builds motivation to actually tackle this content, to go through with this. And those two topics, I think, are going to come up a lot as we continue to speak. But really, when we're talking about those assessments, Helen, you touched on a lot of these. It's a mindset shift, right? Mm-hmm. It's not about completion, which is such a traditional way of looking at it. It's about, can I do the job, right? And so that for me is the value of micro-credentials. It's not about the course itself, this completion idea, but it is about the ability or the learning outcomes that course validates, that proving of the skill is that. So with that in mind, that shift going not about content, it's about performance. To build our assessments, we ask two things, right? What should someone be able to do by the end of a shift? This thing that I'm taking and learning and studying, what am I applying and how am I applying this thing? So that and that's the competency frameworks that you mentioned as well. And then with those identified, how do we prove those? And that's the assessment piece. Mm-hmm. How do we prove that very, very clearly? How do we prove competence? And those assessments, then we design them around real scenarios, what you're saying as well, right? And critically apply judgment. So this idea of, to state it very simply, can I take this thing that I've learned and apply it in a meaningful way to show that I've understood it? And critically, there's the pass criteria. So this, and I think it speaks to not building those traditional educational barriers that you mentioned, Helen, like these criteria. It's not about, you're going to learn this thing and then you're going to write a test on handling guest complaints. No, rather we ask what are the building blocks of the criteria of handling guest complaints. We define those together. Can you de-escalate the situation? Can you identify the issue? Can you follow the right protocol, et cetera, et cetera? And those building blocks are the things that we then claim as the validation criteria, and then we prove them in multiple ways. We prove them, perhaps it's in the traditional that you mentioned, but also the ideal world is the managers there and seeing the practical application of it, or they're validating a recording of it, or critically, it's that well-designed theoretical application of learning. So it's not about this is the one way to validate this thing. It is saying this is the bar, and it stays the same no matter how you demonstrate that thing. And then we have that signal, that trust. This is real capability, and it's that respect. It's going to work for frontline teams across different roles, different regions, different languages. And obviously that's an inevitable complexity that we have to consider in Europe, right? Like there's so much variation. How do we actually achieve that, and how do we speak to it?
Exactly.
All of this is discussions around the learner themselves, but Gerard, when it comes from an employer's point of view, what actually matters from their perspective, apart from, I guess, the practical application, but what are you looking for there from an employer's point of view?
Yeah, I speak to so many customers day in and day out, and whether it be ops leads or L&D leads, and really from an industry perspective, it boils down to, particularly across hospitality, is like, can the person do it? Like, credential aside, doesn't matter what it's called, that you can, all the buzzwords at that point kind of dissolve into a simple focused idea or evidence of, can I trust this person to get the job done? And there's one way that you could look at that under ideal conditions, when the bar's quiet and you're asking someone to kind of stretch milk to make a cappuccino, and they can get that right. But what happens under pressure is the question. Can I put this person on the egg stand at breakfast service on a Sunday morning? What would happen if I had to do that? Or I'm a person short for a shift this weekend, I have an event coming. How do I know from these, I don't know, 10 CVs that I'm looking at, which are now all perfectly written because AI writes perfect CVs, right? So now that we have these perfect CVs, how do I choose from 10 perfect CVs who can actually do this job or not? And so there's a lot of, I guess, from an industry perspective or an employer's perspective, there's a lot of uncertainty, I would say, or ambiguity around what credentials mean what exactly. And it boils down to, this concept that we've started speaking around, which is obviously centered around trust. Like, as an employer, can I trust that this credential means that this person can do the job? And at the same time, as an associate, spending the little time and money that I have to choose to do a particular course, can I trust that this would give me the credential that an employer would see as worthy of doing the job, right? So I think, I mean, a couple of things there, but really from an employer's perspective, it's quite simple, not easy, but quite simple. Can I trust that this credential means that this person has the capabilities the competencies to actually perform under pressure?
You make a very good point there, because in theory you refer to stretching milk, for example. It really is in the time and the practice there. So assessments then really only matter if it creates trust beyond the classroom. As much as you practice, the implementation of that is so important. So I think the proof then moves into how do you actually become something that others recognize, believe in, beyond the training that you've done, and the credibility supports that. So I'd like to put that question towards you, William. How do you then get others to recognize and believe in this beyond the training and the practical application?
Well, I think, first of all, your project is tackling that issue. So I think the answer has come from the MCEU project, in that when it comes to getting to grips with the world of micro-credentials, it's expanding, it's complex, it's diverse, and it needs to be, because of course micro-credentials need to be responsive and flexible and tailored to needs. But what you've done with the MCEU project is you've structured the questions around micro-credentials and how you use them within your ecosystem. And I've just learned a new term, stretching milk. And you know, it's this these skills, these needs, the evolving nature of the profession, what the employers want, what the learners, workers, and job seekers within the hospitality sector need. You've gotten to grips with those issues, and you've come with a response and an approach on how micro-credentials can serve a purpose and can be relevant in that context. What's important is that you didn't start with the question of let's explore micro-credentials. You said, let's explore micro-credentials in our ecosystem. And that's what's so important, because if you're going to get the trust, the buy-in, the recognition, the value, the micro-credentials have to start by being relevant, by being tailored to the specific skills that are needed in the hospitality sector, whatever sector it might be, and then that when the micro-credentials then are structured in a consistent and clear way and communicate the skill and who is involved in issuing the credential, then the employer will or the recruiter will understand that this micro-credential is relevant and targeted and of value, because they're looking to fill those vacancies and attract workers with those skills. And the micro-credential becomes that unit of currency. It becomes that way to communicate that quickly and effectively. Me and my team were involved in developing what became a council recommendation on a European approach to micro-credentials that you mentioned at the beginning and has underpinned your project. And there are sets of principles around what micro-credentials, how to organize them and design them. And the key one for me is relevance. So I think that has to be the starting point, that you're designing a micro-credential. And we have seen projects where the purpose and relevance of the micro-credentials isn't clear from the beginning. But then where they are designed with the employer's needs in mind, with pathways in mind for the learners and the workers to advance in the careers and in the sectors they're interested in and try to advance in, then you get the buy-in and the recognition and the valuing of the micro-credential. So for me, it all goes back to the relevance.
So that recognition that you speak of is, you've mentioned aligned policies and that's, Helen, the recognition involved in that for the learner, whether you have it or you don't have it, how does that actually affect them directly?
Well, for me, recognition has a significant effect on the learner. I've been working in education for the past 25 years, and before that, of course, we're all learners. We're learning all our lives, and recognition just has such a significant effect. And when learning is properly recognized, like we're trying to do in the MCEU project, it gives people confidence and momentum. It shows that their efforts matter. That it matters that they took this course. It matters that they have achieved, and it has real value. If it's just a piece of paper that nobody looks at, then it has less value. So for me, recognition allows skills to travel with the learner, and it's essential. If you're moving from one workplace to another or applying for a school, your credential has to be trustworthy. Because I mean, if someone moves between roles, employers, and countries, especially within hospitality, it's an international job scene. They should be able to take the proof of what they're learning with them, and it has to make sense. And in the MCEU project, we've tried to build the recognition in a meaningful way. Our micro-credentials are supported by a supplement that include quality indicators. They have clearly defined outcomes, and which might not always be so common in short courses. When people attend a short course, very short course, they just get this diploma or the certificate. I attended hygiene, da 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 da. That's it. So we have created supplements that make the credentials more transparent, hopefully more useful, because it helps others to understand what the learner has achieved. And as I mentioned before, they're underpinned by ESCO and the EU recommendations for micro-credentials. Without that recognition, credentials can feel disposable. The learning may have happened, but was it understood or valued? It's so much harder to support progression if it hasn't been valued. Why should I attend the next course that my employee asked me to take if it hasn't value or recognition? So that is why recognition matters so much in my view, and I think for most of us here. It is not just about the credential itself. Like you said, William, we don't start about talking about micro-credentials and what they are and trying to define them. There's nothing new under the sun there. But it is about motivation, retention, and whether learners can see that the efforts that they are putting into this are leading somewhere and are meaningful. So I say recognition has to be based on something transparent and understandable. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the collection that ladders up to something more meaningful. William, I loved that you referred to it as being a currency.
Yeah,
you know, it's transferable. You can take it with you. Gerard, back to the where these micro credentials become actionable for an action employer. What are your thoughts there in terms of the recognition?
Yeah, you know, not to sound like a stuck record, but again, like I think it comes down to this question of trust, right? Like, can I trust that whatever has been recognized, you know, is worth its weight? And I think William made a good point around relevance. Excuse me. You know, we throw around something being relevant quite easily. But what that really means for a credential to be relevant in a environment that's as fast-paced as hospitality is that it also needs to continue to evolve. You know, you can't have credentials that are stagnant or something that you did a couple of years ago that still holds in so many aspects of the world that we work in, right? So I think this industry, for the industry to recognize that, you know, this credential can be trusted, yes, it must be relevant, but it should also get that same recognition from the peers across the industry that says, you know, we recognize that this standard or this credential basically signifies that this person is ready to do or has this particular skill at least. And in doing so, I think we must be open to the fact that this needs to continue to evolve. You know, so it probably becomes time bound as well. So, you know, you are capable and able of doing this particular skill at this moment in time or time frame that we can attach to it. Yeah, so I think, you know, like if you can bring together the assessment protocol with a means that is relevant, as I just described, I think that's a recipe for fostering trust in the credential itself, both for, you know, from an employer's perspective, but also as, again, like as the associate, investing the limited resource, time and money that you have in order to, you know, what you're going to choose, how you're going to spend your weekend. You want to get something back from that investment, obviously. That's a good way to make that decision, I would imagine.
Great, thank you. I am breaking up, or if it's G that was breaking up. Can you hear me clearly?
Okay.
I think I might have been breaking up because I lost you as well,
Sheila.
Sheila. So sorry about that. Let me check.
No problem.
Thanks, G.
I think, you know, what this comes down to though is trust really and assessments, clarity and relevance align, you know, and that's on the side of the learner as well as the employee. You know, you start to recognize that a collection of these credentials ladders up to something recognizable on both sides. Before we continue, I'd like to just remind everyone that please, if you've got any questions, please add them in the chat. We'd love to hear more from you. We are moving quickly in our schedule here, so there's going to be lots of time for questions if you have any. Helen, I'd like to bring it back to you. When we look at trust, we've got trust in the credential now. It's understood and recognized. Now, how do we gain some momentum? How do micro-credentials add up to something more meaningful rather than in an isolated achievement of what does that collection look like?
So we're probably referring here to stackability, I presume, stackability of credentials.
Yes.
Yeah. I think micro-credentials can add up to something meaningful, but can only be stackable if they're intentional. It's not like we're collecting badges in a bag and of something. I think when we talk about stacking up things, it has to be intentional. There has to be this clear pathway of progression and logic behind them. Otherwise, there's this, like I said, this risk of collecting badges rather than real development. Nothing against badges. I have lots of badges. So it's, I think if we would like to use the opportunity, I think, is behind defined micro-credentials, we can stack them up like we've been trying to do within the MCEU project. We took these small learning units, put them into learning pathways. They are short, but still they are pathways. And they have, I think, or can have more value when they're clearly connected through defined learning outcomes, recognized skill frameworks, and overall pathway, like I've been describing here this morning. I mean, you've been talking about, Greg and Gerard, that the employer has to trust this piece of paper or digital credential or whatever the employee is offering, but there has to be some sort of a trusted framework behind, like we have in the formal school system. We talked about units. Why, like in universities, you have ECTS units. In upper secondary schools, there are defined units, but in continuous professional development, there really aren't any defined units. There isn't a currency that we understand. So I think through the EU framework or recommendations for micro-credentials and the ESCO skill banks and other tools, there might be some sort of a framework emerging that might support micro-credentials. So I think it's important for learners to have this kind of clear picture, because it supports lifelong learning in a way that feels manageable but still meaningful. And when people are working, it would be very difficult for them to see, okay, I have to take 20 courses in the next 20 months or something like that. But if we can put it down to bite sizes and show that they are stackable, that there is logic, then there is a journey that the learner is hopefully and willing and interested in to partake in. So, and it's important for employers because it gives a clear signal on how skills are and how they foresee skills developing over time. So for me, the issue is not just whether credentials can stack, but whether they're designed to stack with a purpose. So I think you guys at EcoSure and Lobstering, you are the specialists in this area, and I'm sure you have something to share in that aspect.
Yeah,
Yes,
if I can
Greg.
pop in there real quick, Sheila. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes,
Can I just
sure.
add there 2 cents real quick? I think that's such a good point. Like we have these frameworks that exist. If you think about ESCO, for instance, I mean it's this tremendous
Huge
library. Yeah,
monster.
yeah. I mean, and fantastic body of work, right? Like amazing. But from an industry perspective, so few managers are aware that it exists, never mind the contents of it, right? So I mean, from the research that was done as part of the project, we see that 3 out of 4 associates, whether working or not, are actively trying to further their skills, doing short courses, doing, taking micro learnings, et cetera, et cetera. But only half of the managers employing those associates actually are aware of micro credentials to start off with. So there's this seemingly big disconnect between the official frameworks that exist, which are, again, super comprehensive and fantastic bodies of work in their own right. The motivation driven by associates to, want to get after this, want to accumulate the right skills, want to get after that, next step in their career or into the job market, et cetera, et cetera. And the managers or the employers at the end of the day hiring these associates just have this sort of lack of awareness that, hey, this is going on in the first place.
Exactly.
And so I think that the question of stackability, or the conversation of stackability, really needs to be had in that context. Is that, do managers understand the skills, competencies, and competence sets that they need to perform, that they need for associates to perform their jobs properly, and can articulate that in a means that ties up with a skills framework like ESCO has developed, for instance. And because I hate to break it to you, but a supervisor or a manager in a restaurant is not thinking about the ESCO framework when they're thinking about what to do on the next shift. This is
totally. I worked in hospitality, so I know what you're talking about. But still, it doesn't mean that we can't, as educators, and believe in the power of education, and that's
100%.
Yeah.
I think the irony is it would make their lives much easier if they did understand the contents thereof, and did understand how to articulate the skills and the competency sense specifically that they need, because then they know exactly what it is that they're after. To the point earlier of trust is earned if you can see that this credential is working in practice. So I think it's a matter of bringing industry closer at the same time. Absolutely, as you said.
Thank you, G. I think, can you all hear me clearly? I am very badly, so I just want to ensure you can all hear me.
You're good.
Great. Okay. So, off the back of this, I think, Greg, in order to make stackability work really well, what's happening behind the scenes when we're actually designing these programs?
Big fan of stackability. Like it's the golden grail, and it goes back to the thing that I said earlier, right? It's that we're all saying, what an amazing opportunity to give somebody who works in hospitality profession with a limited amount of time, the opportunity to say, I can tackle this thing in tiny little steps, in bite sizes, and over time I can earn something real. I can earn a qualification, same as anybody who had the luxury of the time or economic luxury, whatever that may be, to sit and study a real degree. Like, that is such a beautiful thing and a beautiful opportunity. Yeah, right. It's and to do that, right? The behind the scenes thing. It's what Helen was saying. It's not the badge collection game, right? It is saying, can I build capability in a meaningful way over time? Great. How do we do that, right? There are two. I would say there are two pieces, and there's one that's critical and speaks to G, what you mentioned earlier, that trust or the confidence in performance under pressure. That's a really interesting thing. How do we actually design intentionally for progression, as you said, Helen, for that progression towards that? So it's not just about, yes, I'm learning this set of skills that do make sense. It's all about designing those skills in such a way as there is progression in complexity of that skill itself. So yes, it's about breadth, but how am I showing increased capability? I have I can handle greater complexity. I can do so with greater independence, and I can do so with better judgment. And then we're showing I'm building not this way, but this way as well, right? Which is a beautiful thing. And all tied into the motivation aspect, the relevance, as you said, yes, absolutely critical. But there's also the doability. Can I do this thing? Is it actually feasible for me? Yes, it's in small blocks. It is feasible. I love that. You're not expecting me to consume massive amounts of information and become a master of something. No, I can see, respect, and appreciate that you've built and identified the building blocks of it, and I am tackling those building blocks one by one. What a beautiful thing, right? And so that's the agreed competency foundation, the little blocks. I talk about blocks a lot. I think I played a lot with Lego as a child, right? The key little blocks that you need to recognize, identify, and train against. And then there's visibility that everybody's been saying, visibility for the learner. I have a goal. I see what has been done. There's that. I see that you recognize the things that I have learned and the abilities I have gained as well. What a beautiful thing. And then the visibility for the hiring managers, the managers. I know what you've done. I know what comes next. I know how to support you if you're in-house already, and critically, that hiring decision. And then we have momentum, not isolated activity, not just this little, I'm going to learn this thing, and now I'm going to learn this thing. No, when everybody sees that big, beautiful picture, that's our momentum.
So then it brings me to think then, William, in terms of alignment across institutions when it comes to this, is there anything you'd like to share there?
Really, the conversation is so important and also really rewarding for me, because the commission where I work, one of the institutions in question, we started to tackle or explore what would be necessary and relevant at EU level behind the world of micro-credentials, almost as far back as 2021. And for once I thought that maybe the EU was coming too soon and that we were ahead of the curve for once. But actually, I think the eventual council proposal or council recommendation that's out there in the ether now put in place an important element, an enabling framework, that set out principles, a definition, key components of micro-credentials, the importance of using, a data model, the European learning model behind it, so that the micro-credentials themselves can be designed with some common elements in place, but that ultimately always respects the points I made at the beginning around the need for their responsiveness and flexibility and use in different contexts. And even with the council recommendation in place, then ultimately it's projects like MCEU where you are the pioneers, you're the piloters, you're doing the hard work, because what you're starting is the work around the cultural shift towards micro-credentials, and then becoming a part of the conversation about lifelong learning and employability. We've been talking about lifelong learning at EU level since the 1970s. Now, not me, I haven't been around since the 70s, but that conversation has been ongoing, and it moves in and out of fashion. And what I like about micro-credentials is that they give us a structured way and a very tangible way to talk about lifelong learning and talk about that you continue learning after your initial education, whatever formal route you may have completed or whenever you may have left formal education. Here are the stackable, flexible routes for you to continue, learning and having your credential. Is why I really like the term credential. A credential is, it's your signal. It's you represent a visible way for you to represent these packages or these bite-sized pieces of learning. So in terms of the institutional buy-in, I see that it's still rolling out, but I think a lot of the work is falling to implementers like you and piloters like you, that you're making micro-credentials part of the conversation, and really, then that you're also doing the hard work in the background in terms of using ESCO so that there's common vocabulary and nomenclature in there, using the common elements and the definition within the council recommendation, so that even though you're taking these what's perceived as an abstract new idea of a micro-credential, which isn't really new, but you're taking these elements from the council recommendation and you're piloting them through your project and asking about them, and you're making them part of the conversation. So you're enabling the cultural shift. And then it's our job in the in the commission and working with the other institutions that we're making sure we're providing support, enabling projects, putting in place an enabling framework like the European Learning Model and ESCO that hopefully are there for you to use in an accessible way, so that we're ultimately enabling and complementing your work. So yeah, the institutions and the work that the commission does and so forth, we need to be vigilant in making sure that we're listening to the outcomes of projects like this to make sure we're continually supporting your work. And so I think, yeah, the institutions, we need to be in a monitoring and an enabling mode, and then let you do the hard work.
Wonderful. That's really great work. What it says to me though then is that stackability only really works when it's designed well, communicated clearly, and then recognized together. I'd like to just pause at this point. We have a question from Rolf. Would you like to come off mute and ask a question?
Yes, please. Perhaps not so much a question, but perhaps more a comment. Because and thank you for having opened the micro-credential discussions in this way, because having worked now with micro-credentials, learning outcome descriptions over many years, longer than the European Commission has been working on that. I think we are in what I would call a blurred discussion, because you are referring to the 2022 recommendation on micro-credentials. And that is a credential definition. If we go to CEDEFOP, they are using the term micro-credential in a slightly different meaning. A micro-credential is a course, short training provision directly targeted at the labor market and reflecting labor market needs and requirements. I think that this is visible in CEDEFOP documentation. They are writing micro-credentials without a hyphen. The recommendation is using the hyphen. This is a very small, tiny distinction, but at the same time, it is explaining or describing two different approaches to micro-credentials. On the one hand, the course and provision as such, and the other hand, on the credentializing of the outcomes of that. Mm-hmm. I think that in most discussions, this is not, on the one hand, clearly defined, mm-hmm. It's not visible, and it creates enormous misunderstandings at field level. Mm-hmm. You are representing, or I can say I've been in a situation of being responsible on the Brussels side in many aspects. So we have a responsibility to be quite clear on this. And if there is some work, as I think William was indicating, on refining the recommendation work from the Commission, I think this is the first element to be addressed, because this is also reflecting I would call it the heritage from Canada, Australia, and so on, using micro-credentials in the CEDEFOP version and not the Commission version understanding. So I just leave that for the floor, and then I will get back a little later on the learning outcomes in this context. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolf. Helen, would you like to say anything further on this?
No, yeah, just it's a good point that Rolf is bringing up definitions and approaches and understanding. It's a very, very tricky thing, and it's yeah, and we're treading here, at least from my part, in little kind of muddy waters still, but I do really appreciate that there is a framework or recommendation that is coming out of the EU. And of course, like Rolf says, in Australia, they've really gone quite far, or are very advanced, and in Canada when it comes to micro-credentials in lifelong learning. So it's a lot for us to learn there, I think. So yeah, but yeah, it's a good point. And we should dive into that and read up on the different approaches from CEDEFOP and from the Commission.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. Moving on, I'd like to pick up from, we were talking previously about stackability, and how when it works and it's designed, communicated, and recognized together, that's the only way that it really works. If we move then from how we design it and the reality on the ground and how we then scale, Gerard, when it comes to when does this break? When do micro-credentials move from pilots into the real world scale? That's where the rubber hits the road. So when do you see that this tends to break?
Yeah, thanks, Sheila. As we move into reality, again, I think just to build on what Rolf was saying as well, like while we absolutely must be clear about the definitions here, and as a particularly from a policy perspective, particularly from an educational perspective, those definitions really do matter. From an industry perspective, again, stuck record here, but I'm concerned about, can this person do the job or not? I'm not concerned whether the term has a hyphen or not. And I say that flippantly, meaning respect to the comment. Like, again, these definitions are important because they dissolve ambiguity and they provide more certainty and more clarity as to what we actually mean when we say micro-credentials. And so then industry can understand what we mean when we say micro-credentials, right? But it's this complexity that prevents us from moving from a pilot, very well controlled, managed pilot, to adoption at scale. If I'm running an organization with thousands of frontline workers, I don't have the resource and people to go and monitor, do human checks on whether everybody has the skills they say they have in the real world. And there's a level of trust that needs to be placed on whether that is evidenced or not. And so where I see this break down often is in over-engineering, so that too much complexity is left in a system before you're trying to scale it, right? So again, pilot conditions are by design usually very well controlled and managed. And as you then try and move into that next phase of adoption, sometimes there's still too much complexity in the system. And hospitality, as we all know, is a busy environment. People are busy. They do not have time or often motivation to go and stretch their brains and wrap their heads around, what this actually means and what it doesn't mean and what the next step should be and how do I do this. And, you asking me to do this is asking me to learn a new skill at the same time while I'm trying to figure out how to provide these skills to my people. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying as much complexity as we can strip out of the system, the better. Again, simplicity is the way to move this into practice, to drive better adoption, and to ensure that the outcomes are we can attribute value more clearly based on the outcomes.
Yes, and time being as scarce as it is, it's important then that learning integrates with operations in a smooth way.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to build on that real quick, the sometimes I still witness a disconnect between L&D's view on skills and competencies and what needs the skills and competencies that need to be developed for particular job roles, and what ops needs and where those gaps are. And we can see this very clearly in data where there might be opportunities for improvement for which the training material or the learning material isn't yet there, or if it is, it's not quite relevant, or it was relevant a year ago, back to the time component of this, right? So this alignment between ops and L&D, I think, is becoming even more essential than what it was in the past, considering how fast the world moves, how quickly things change, how much pressure there is on operations to deliver with ever decreasing margins for error. This absolute alignment between learning initiatives and what is necessary from an operational performance perspective is becoming increasingly important.
Thank you. Rolf, did you want to add to that?
I think I would support Gerard very much on his the primary criterion. My formulation is, do you fix the job? And that is the real criterion here. And that is hinged upon, on the one hand, and when you're going to transfer that from one situation to another, it's a question of, on the one hand, the validity of it. That means the recognition procedure, the trustworthiness, and so on. And the other side is the value, and that is linked to one of my favorites, which is the multilingual versions of learning outcomes. So if we are talking about having things on the one hand stackable and portable, that has not been mentioned that much, but the stackability and portability are two basic criteria here. And in that case, carefully developed learning outcomes are the key point here, which then are in multilingual versions, documenting transparency requirements, and easier for people in other situations to understand. So I can refer to several projects where we have been contributing with our skills bank system with multilingual versions of learning outcomes. I take one example. The first example is the ASEX project, which is the agriculture expert in circular economy. In that case, we have 23 micro-credentials, in the sense courses, which are given certificates piece by piece, and with a certificate addendum or supplement, depending upon which I would say jargon we should use, which is in line with the European 2022 recommendation. And these 23 micro-credential courses, they can be stacked towards a more complete qualification description, because they are sorted or categorized in 4 different subsets, which together form the umbrella certification. And back to that again, using this with multilingual learning outcomes, multilingual certifications. We are covering now, I think, 9 languages in parallel here. And that is also mirroring another project, the Be Well in the health sector, a similar approach, and a very special project, which is the BEM, Beyond Europe with Micro-Credentials, which is a capacity, or which was a capacity building project, where we produced nearly 70 micro-credential concepts targeting Ukraine, Armenia, Georgia, Montenegro, and so on. So here we have the multilingual opportunity and dramatic potential of developments. So I'm back to that when we are delivering that through Skills Bank, and the Skills course is a learning platform. It is functioning quite well across borders, and I should appreciate very much having a future cooperation with this project, because there are so many common things, and I've been working with Helen for just a few years, Helen. So I'm not being too detailed on that, but
Yes.
we've been working on learning outcomes, permeability, and the cross-border recognition earlier on.
Great. I mean, this sounds like there's a lot of alignments here. Thanks for your insights. It's really good to see how micro-credentials are expanding. So thank you. We'll definitely ensure that we connect with you after this. I would like to just touch on one last thing with regards to scale, Greg. Just to close out on that conversation, what early design decisions do you determine whether scale is possible later? I would imagine it's tied to the stackability aspects.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything we've said, right? All the things that we've been talking about need to be defined and decided well in advance. You can't look at it the other way around. I think keys, and these were revealed in our first pilot, right? Like there are 2 keys that pilot showed, which I think is worth focusing on, right? It's the standardized frameworks that we've been talking about all along, my favorite little building blocks. Because those building blocks are the absolute essential and the foundation of everything we've spoken about, right? The trust, the credibility, the progression, the assessments, building proper assessments, right? So that absolutely has to be done. And in our first pilot, they showed, and we know this, Gerard, that speaking to that reality, learners appreciated this modular flexibility, respect for their time, the reality of their busy hospitality environments. They respect it, they see it will fit them, and so they can and will use it. It's a very, very simple thing. But in that same pilot, it was also revealed that second part, and Rolf, you mentioned it as well, the portability, right? Like there's a technical design aspect, both in terms of content, but the technology. So the technology piece, we haven't really touched on yet, but we're talking like the build part of that, is how is this being transported? The digital validation that here we're using the Europass and the blockchain to achieve, and the verification, similar. We've been speaking a lot about that, and critically the interpretation, and that, Gerard, is what you were talking about, right? Because and back to motivation, if those fail at any point, then hey, why am I doing this? Motivation gets destroyed, and I don't do it. And I think there's another piece there, Rolf. You touched on languages, and I think it's more than languages. It's about localization. Like if we're looking at that interpretation and understanding and seeing the value and growing to understand what, as an employer, what micro-credentials mean with me, it is if I can translate this thing that I'm seeing into my local reality into my operation. And that's a lot of planning and work that needs to happen up front to say, cool, we have these frameworks, we understand the building blocks, but now how are we shaping these building blocks so that they're understood in multiple locations across languages and across operations as well?
Scale is the outcome of good design up front, right? It's not a later afterthought, you know, it's baked into the process.
100%.
Well, you know, this has been great conversation. We've heard some really rich perspectives from our panelists, you know, how to make micro-credentials, how they should be designed, assessed, you know, what makes them trusted, scalable. I have seen a few questions come through, so I'd like to turn it over to our audience for Q&A. If there's more, let's see how we go. But I'd like to start with a question to William. The EC has developed and is still developing EU frameworks for micro-credentials and skills portability. From your perspective, what is still missing from real employer adoption?
Thanks, Ala, and thanks for the question. This is, like Helen said at the beginning, there's nothing new under the sun, and this question of employer engagement in general is one of the oldest chestnuts to crack, and kind of the buy-in of employers in being part of, you know, these lifelong learning ecosystems, and that they're supporting lifelong learning, and that they see value in supporting the upskilling and reskilling of employees who, you know, may or may not leave, and that they're investing so that if we had this culture of upskilling and reskilling in the labor market, you know, it would support progression and careers. So this is why, again, I see the real potential in the world of micro-credentials and projects like this, and that they become this currency. Because right now, if you're managing your career, moving between jobs, trying to communicate your skills to employers beyond just the formal qualification that, you know, is, you know, may be the minimum entry requirements to be considered for a job, but then you need to demonstrate your other skills, your other experiences, and the micro-credentials can be the signal for that. So it really is a case of tackling the very issues that you're tackling here that employers don't know about ESCO. They don't know about the European Qualifications Framework. They don't know about learning outcomes, but they still need to be at the receiving end of the clear, consistent information, the digestible information that you're that is going to be the outcome of projects like this. So we need the twofold approach of, you know, that national governments, employers, education and training institutions need to be in the same dialogue together. And, you know, we work on this at EU level, and so does every government. It is always the issue, though, one of the eternal questions we have in any policy topic. We look at what do employers want when it comes to recruitment and understanding skills and qualifications and learning. You know, what do they actually want to see? We know that they want to fill vacancies quickly with the right people, but they need to be part of the process of getting there. So it's increasing this dialogue, and then I really do think that more systematic uptake of micro-credentials, and that employers are involved from the design phase, identifying the need and the design of the micro-credential, that they become a partner in the designing of them, and then there's going to be the uptake and the adoption by employers, so that, you know, they really become part of the conversation.
Well, they're invested in the solution, right? So then that
That's
makes
it.
for the better partnership, 100%.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question that will go to Gerard. Has participating in a project like MCEU brought EcoSure closer to considering EU frameworks when designing courses? And what would still need to be added for you to adopt them more systematically?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the short answer is yes, absolutely. You know, this is, I think, much more a part of our conversation than it was in the past. However, you know, we serve customers in 140 plus different countries. So I guess adopting EU framework in particular needs to be specific to the content we're creating for the EU or customers that are mostly aligned to Europe. More broadly, though, using a framework of understanding very clearly how specific learning outcomes are contributing to particular skills, how those skills ladder up to competencies, how those competencies ladder up to competency sets, is a conversation that we have ongoingly as we think about which new courses to add to our ever-growing library of hospitality training, but also in consultation with customers to see what content they might need in order to get their people from A to B. And then, of course, at what point, where is the relevant point at which to provide a credential? What is that credential? Also a big part of the conversation. We're actively having conversations with our customers around micro credentials themselves, the value they see in them, how they would deploy it inside their organizations. So which gets pretty case specific pretty quickly. But again, the short answer is absolutely. We've learned a lot through our participation in the project, the research that we've done, and collaborating with the wonderful set of partners we have in the consortium, and become a lot more, I guess, systematic in terms of how we think about skills, competency sets, qualifications, etc. Greg, I don't know if you've got anything to add there, or keep me honest as I answer that.
No, you're good. You're good.
Great.
But this ties actually quite nicely into another question that's come up. And perhaps Helen, if you'd like to contribute, it's a question from a VET perspective. Could you provide an example of how micro-credentials should be designed to build coherent learning pathways?
Okay, VET. What is VET? Vocational Education and Training. Yeah, it's you can have IVET, CVET, all sorts of different VETs. It can be. We usually think about that as a part of a formal school system, but as well, it can of course be continuous VET, but it's usually somewhat formalized. So I think from a VET perspective, micro-credentials become meaningful when they're designed as a real progression pathway, like I mentioned before, not like a standalone badge thing. So I mean, when I talk about badges, I think badges are great, and courses are great, and not every piece of learning has to be a micro-credential, as we are working with the definition of micro-credentials that the EU has provided us with. For example, in hospitality, a learner might begin with a micro-credential in hygiene and safe work practice, and then move into applying procedures and daily operations, and then later into supervisory level credential. And each step has like this value on the way, and really has this like, but really has to like have a clear pathway, what comes next. That coherence is an important part. The learning outcomes need, as we've talked about before, people who work in education know what we're talking about. Learning outcomes need to be clearly defined, linked, and recognized as, again, in a skills framework, assessed and credible and context appropriate, as has been mentioned also here this morning. And the learner needs to be able to see how one achieves and builds towards a broader competence progression. So I also think it's important to say clearly that this should not be seen as a threat to formal qualification. Why do I say this? Because we do get, and I have been asked, well, is this like a shorter version of a formal education, a formal VET education? Are we... my answer is always no, we are not. It can lead to a formal education if the micro-credential is so well defined that it can be validated to a formal curricula, then that is definitely value in that. And I think formal qualifications still have enormous value. But like I think Greg talked about, life takes you on different pathways. And sometimes you just didn't have the time when you were 16 or 18 or 20 to get your formal qualification. And life happens. And it's great if we have educational offers to kind of and support to support people if they want and they need to learn more. So formal qualifications, like I said, still have enormous value. Micro-credentials should not replace them as such or diminish them. They should complement. I think there's huge potential in micro-credentials to complement formal education. And as again, I mentioned earlier this morning, this idea of a currency in continuous professional development courses. I think that would help a lot. And I do think also there is real value here from the perspective of validation of prior learning, or recognition of prior learning is probably more familiar in the English-speaking world. So and I think just to kind of wrap this up in regards with this is from a vet perspective. In Europe is already relatively mature approach when we talk about validation of prior learning. And for us who were involved in that 20, 30 years ago, we really saw something progress and has become a part of our educational system. And I think that micro-credentials, the way they are coming into the conversation now, has that potential. I truly believe so, that micro-credentials could have this potential. So one of the key lessons from the MCEU project is so far that when micro-credentials are designed as a part of a structured pathway with clear outcomes, assessment, and progression logic, they become more meaningful both for the learner and for the employer. And how can that should support lifelong learning in a coherent way, rather than just simply creating more certificates. I think it has to have a deeper meaning when we talk about micro-credentials. That's kind of my take. And whether this is a vet perspective, yes, I think we have to work with the formal school system when that is appropriate. Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not. But we're all rowing towards the same end point, or to kind of support people to have a better life, better quality of life, and that we do through education. That's my belief. So yeah, if we end on that, yeah, uptake note.
Yeah. Yes, as we said earlier, it meets the learner where they are in the flow of work, within their environments, with their employer, at any stage of their development, right? Alla, you have your hand raised.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, thank you very much for the discussion. Very, very interesting. And we are proud of this project and what we are achieving with MCEU so far. And I think my comment was about the question, and Helen really answered most of it. I just want to say that what we are testing through MCEU, we're not looking at micro-credentials in isolation, but we are designing stackable and recognized skills pathway by combining different EU frameworks like ESCO alignment, clear learning outcomes, stackability, micro-credential design, EQF referencing, and finally issuing with Europass, EPSI compliant digital credentials. All of this come under MCEU. I think this is, or there is a real recipe here that when these elements come together, micro-credentials become understandable, trusted, and easier to scale as well. This is what moves us from isolated courses to skills that employers can recognize and understand, and also from the learner's perspective, they can carry across roles and countries as well. So we're very much happy to coordinate and also to take those learnings and best practices also to other projects, and we will be more than happy to share them as well with William and with the Commission, DG Employment, and the great work that they are doing with the Skills Portability Initiative to make sure that the results of this project is understood and taken more to make skills or projects like this future-proof as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Appreciate that input. I have one more question directed to William. And in terms of longevity, what happens to the proof of a micro-credential in 10 years? Skills portability only works if the infrastructure underneath is built to last. A credential that cannot be verified independently of the platform that's issued it, or that expires when a vendor changes its business model, is not a trusted signal. It's a well-intentioned document.
Yes, absolutely. When we were developing the Europass framework for issuing digital credentials to the Commission, which has been an ongoing piece of work since the
beginning of time.
Yes, well, more specifically since about 2018. So still, what feels like a lifetime ago. We, of course, so there is a framework there that can be used. The European learning model is behind it, and it can be used for issuing secure digital credentials, including for micro credentials. But of course, we know that this issue of portability has come up throughout the discussion today, and that you need an infrastructure behind it. When we built the Europass system, and the way that it operates now is that, in fact, it ensures the validity of credentials for up to 40 years, even though that is a number that's been debated and questioned. And then even based on our discussion today, I don't know what type of credential a learner or a worker would have that they might still need to use in 10 years' time. Maybe they should have a continually updated profile or catalog of micro-credentials. So yes, basically the systems for issuing the credentials, for storing them in wallets, that the Commission plays a role in, has played a role in through Europass, but also, the local systems, the systems that are being developed. The key thing is that we're enabling the interoperability and the portability of them, of the systems that are issuing and then storing and then sharing the micro-credentials, because whatever of the longevity, we need to ensure the security and the portability of the micro-credentials, and that just hinges on the digitalization aspects, that you're using the secure infrastructure, which the MCEU project has been doing. So I don't know if anyone who holds a micro-credential right now needs to be able to communicate that in 10 years, but the potential absolutely needs to be there. So the system that the Commission has put in place, as I say, has this lifespan of 40 years. But really, as we see the upscale and the uptake of micro-credentials, and as I say, I think the ambition of this project and the way that we've been talking today is about having them become a currency, and that if in particular the employers are seeing value in them, then they're going to be motivating and supporting their employers to upskill and reskill and enroll in the learning experiences or earning micro-credentials. Then these need to become part of our individual learning accounts and the digital wallets, that HR systems need to be able to store information on them. So just that, the ecosystem I talked about at the beginning needs to be reinforced by a technical ecosystem that just enables the exchange of information on micro-credentials, really just as a part of how we manage our digital and our information about our learning and our careers. So it's a key part of the question around micro-credentials. we're slowly shifting away from a paper-based world for traditional qualifications and education and training, and we shouldn't repeat those same issues. Micro-credentials can't be framed on a wall. That's not what they're about. So this is about the digitalization and the interoperability and portability of them. So we've built that into the commission system, but then, those other projects and other providers also need to bear that in mind. So we'll always refer people back to the council recommendation and encourage use of the common elements and using the data model, the European learning model, to support exchange of information on micro-credentials.
Thank you. Panelists, thank you. I think this has been a very insightful conversation, and thank you for the contributions made and questions shared. To wrap this session, could each of you share one piece of advice for organizations starting their micro-credentialing journey? As we've listened to the conversations today, I think it's clear that we need to start with the learner and the reality of the job and meeting them where they are. Do you agree? Should we start with Greg? We haven't heard from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Start with the job, start with the learner, design everything around real performance, right? Because then we have that signal that is able to use and trusted and all those good things that we spoke about. And so if I were to leave one thought, it is that design piece, the building blocks, is such a critical part, and absolute rigor must be applied in this design phase, and the consideration of the 4 key things, right? Who is this learner? What must they do? Under what circumstances, and how well must they do it? And if we're covering those, we know that our objectives are well written, there's no blurry lines, and we're able to build and stack and create a learning path that has value and relevance and respect on the employer side.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll add to that from an industry perspective to wrap that as well, Sheila. I think like the from an employer's perspective, being clear about that is really important. What are those skills that you're asking for that design to be wrapped around? What is it that you need your team to know at the different levels of your organization? Just tying into this conversation around stackability, what does that look like for your organization? Use the frameworks that exist. Absolutely, there's so much good work and thinking that's been invested in creating them. But then what does it look like for your organization? Because each organization is slightly different, right? And being clear about those skills and competencies, I think will go a long way in this conversation to bring L&D and operations closer together.
And there's a piece that you brought up earlier, right? When that difference in language between ops and L&D, it's such a big thing, and we've faced that. Traditionally as Lobster, we've spoken to L&D people, and now in the past few years, we're really dealing with ops people, and we had to change everything about the way that we speak. And I think there's such an important responsibility that sits with us, which is making sure that we are speaking both of those languages, and we're in the middle there, making sure that we have that learning rigor, but we're speaking the ops language, because otherwise it goes nowhere.
100%. We're applying all the good tried and tested methodologies that we know to work from a learning perspective, but the context in which we're applying that is almost always within operations, and there your quest is for performance. Your quest is for minimizing risk, maximizing returns, and so that just understanding that is the world that the learning needs to be deployed in at the end of the day, I think is important.
It's striking that balance between the development of the individual and solving the on-the-ground problem. We always find ourselves in that tension point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything to add, Helen?
Just shortly, I think just to kind of underpin what both Jared and Greg have been talking about is both from the employee and employer side, it's what's in it for me, and we have to be really clear of from a micro-credential perspective and what the MCEU project is doing, what is different from what we're already doing. And really, we are packaging training and using different frameworks to try and align the courses with these defined frameworks. But also, I think what would really make a difference is if the digitization of credentials that are secure, cannot tamper with, and have real value for the learner to be able to, I mean, face it, we do everything through this today.
Mhm.
Yes.
And when we can download our credentials in our credential wallet and
Yes.
share through our credential wallet, I think that will be a selling point.
Yes, the transferring.
Transferring. And I don't know, William, you talked about what's happening in regards with the digitization, but I mean, how far along is the EU DI for it's the progress in the financial sector has advanced a lot, but for education, for us to be able to have a portal where we can upload our credentials, whether they are formal or non-formal, is non-existent really in the EU. As it's in a national context, we have our portals, but in a European context, I don't think we're there yet. So MCEU was, yeah, so that's a longer discussion. So I just wanted to kind of push that in there, that I think that would definitely be a selling point for both learners and employers, the digitization.
William, did you want to add to that?
Yes, no, thank you. No, so this is a key point we're looking at the moment in the context of the an ongoing policy initiative called the Skills Portability Initiative.
Exactly.
And it's looking specifically at the use case of diplomas and education and training outcomes in the context of the EU DI wallet.
Mm-hmm.
So really, this is we're actively looking at it right now in terms of the possible solutions and the policy options, because as you say, the other systems and other tools are getting ready for the EU DI wallet, but there is the one gap of education and training.
Yeah.
In the meantime, though, there is the European digital credential system, for issuing different types of credentials that can be stored in the Europass wallet. But it's absolutely the key element, and really it's when the EU is active on a topic, or when the Commission is active on a topic, it's always going to have that cross-border, cross-system element, that we're operating at EU level, and that fits very well with the portability ambition of micro-credentials. So we're aware of this gap and actively working on it. And then really my only message for projects like this, or for is to, of course, send your messages and your findings and your results to the world, because you're doing such important work, and you're taking the fear factor out of it. Because when we started with this work X number of years ago, we were tackling the tricky abstract issues of a definition that we framed in terms of lifelong learning and employability. But then a project like this, you take this definition and you give it meaning, and you put it in context. And you've answered the questions at the beginning. It is the learner, it's the job, it's the context. But then you're taking the fear factor out of it, asking the real questions. So it's so important really to share your results and promote what you've done, which is key for every project, but I think in particular work like you've done with MCEU.
Super. Thank you. All right. Well, with just 1 minute left, in summary, I think we can agree that micro-credentials aren't just smaller courses. They're a different way of recognizing actual skills. And when assessments, recognition, stackability, and scale are designed together, then micro-credentials can become really trusted signals, especially for these frontline hospitality workers, and the future vision that we have. That is just a really exciting endeavor that you're on there. So thank you very much for everyone's time. It's been a meaningful and really good discussion. I'd like to remind everybody on the call before we drop to please sign up for our MCEU newsletter. You can find the subscription link on the MCEU website. And we look forward to further robust discussions. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Bye. Thank you.